The first time I heard her voice call me a trespasser, it wasn't out by the fence line or over some HOA letter. It was through the crackle of a radio 10 feet from my desk. I was sitting in my little office at the Redwater County Volunteer Fire Station, nursing burnt coffee and finishing training reports, when the dispatch console lit up and the operator said, 911. We've got a complaint of a dangerous squatter at Ironwood Lake. Caller says he refuses to leave a private HOA lake, and I glanced at the screen, saw the coordinates, and my stomach went cold because that squatter was supposed to be me on my lake, on my land. My name is Caleb Rourke. I'm 52, third-generation cattleman in Redwater County, Montana, and I also wear the badge of volunteer fire chief for this county. Not because it pays, it doesn't, but because out here if you don't show up for your neighbors, nobody will. My family's place, Rourke Ranch, is 640 acres of hills, pine, wind, and sweat bought by my grandfather after the war. And right in the middle of it sits Ironwood Lake, 12 acres of spring-fed water my granddad ditched by hand. My father stocked with trout, and I learned to swim in before I could spell my own last name. It's not just a lake. It's the backbone of everything the name Rourke means. Mornings at the ranch smell like sap, diesel, and strong coffee, the kind my wife Mara Rourke, the school librarian in town, jokes could stand upright without a mug. My dad, Roy Rourke, 91, Korean War vet, lives in the guest cabin and shuffles down to the dock every dawn, line in the water no matter what the sky looks like. Our kids work up in Billings but come home for the 4th and Christmas. And for most of my life, the loudest thing on the property was a storm front or bawling calves, until 5 years ago when an 80-acre tract east of US got carved up, paved over, and renamed Ironwood Bluffs. Some outfit out of Helena, a developer called High Summit Properties, sliced that piece into a dozen luxury mountain homes, 800+ thousand apiece, big glass windows staring straight across the pines toward Ironwood Lake. And before the paint dried, the Ironwood Bluffs Community Association sprang to life. Thick covenants, glossy newsletters, and a board that talked like they came here for peace and nature, but brought California HOA energy with them. From their decks they can see my water, but on paper they've got zero rights to it. Every inch of shoreline sits inside my deed, and I've got the surveys to prove it. At first it was manageable. Folks would wander up to the fence, ask if they could cast a line. I'd lay out the plat maps, explain the boundary, sometimes let a family fish when I was around. No problem. Then Melanie Crosswell showed up, late 50s, ex-corporate HR from somewhere in the Bay Area, all yoga pants, expensive highlights, and a white Tesla with a plate that literally says Lake LVR1. The kind of person who weaponizes the phrase for the good of the community. Within 6 months, she'd gotten herself elected president of the Ironwood Bluffs Community Association, and 2 weeks into her reign, a certified letter landed in my mailbox like a brick of smug. She claimed some ancient county map granted a public easement to Ironwood Lake, demanded a 5-foot walking trail across Rourke Ranch plus seasonal dock rights for her homeowners, and politely threatened further action if I didn't comply within 30 days. I paid a professional surveyor and a title attorney to make sure I wasn't crazy. $3,200 later, Lauren Keating, my land savvy lawyer who grew up on a ranch herself, handed me a neat packet that said, in legal language, not only was there no easement now, there had never been one, not in 1889, not in any year since. The county clerk personally confirmed it. I sent Melanie copies of everything, calm, factual, thinking that would be the end of it. She didn't apologize, didn't even blink. She just changed her angle of attack. The next letter accused me of encroaching on common area, claimed my fence had stolen HOA land for years, and when I laughed and walked out one Tuesday to find her and 3 board members plus an out of state surveyor 200 yards inside my gate, tripods and gear set up like they were planting a flag, I understood we weren't in a misunderstanding anymore. We were in a campaign. I told them they were on private ground, told them to leave or I'd call the sheriff. And Melanie did what people like her do. She flipped her phone to record, called my reaction harassment, tried to drag me into a scene, but I'd spent too many years putting out fires to play that game. I took my own photos instead, got their faces, plates, equipment, logged the time, and went back to my barn while they stood there. Confused I wasn't exploding, that afternoon Lauren Keating drafted a cease and desist, and I filed a professional complaint against the surveyor, who folded instantly, sent a letter saying Melanie Crosswell had misled him and instructed him to trespass, throwing her under the bus so fast you could still smell the rubber. That should have cooled things off. Instead, she ran to the HOA Facebook group, wrote a dramatic post calling me aggressive and dangerous, twisted my words into threats, and 100 strangers I'd never met started calling for my head, saying a guy like me shouldn't be fire chief. My wife Mara read it on her phone at our kitchen table, cheeks burning because those parents gossip in her library. And that night I sat on the dock next to Roy, listening to the water and his old man mutter that some people have more venom than sense, staring at the reflection of my own lake and realizing this wasn't going to blow over, it was going to blow up. Once Melanie realized she couldn't conjure an easement out of thin air, she moved to a different kind of choke point. I drove out one freezing morning to check the back pastures and found the gate on the county road easement, my legal access to the far 40, clamped shut with a heavy chain and a brand new padlock that wasn't mine, steel message hanging in the dawn. I cut it, of course, because I carry bolt cutters like most folks carry sunglasses, tended my cattle, and the next day there was a bigger lock, heavier chain, same smug silence. But after her first stunt with the rogue survey, I'd started thinking like a man under siege instead of just irritated. I'd tucked a small game camera into a pine above that gate. Motion, activated, night vision, time-stamped. That afternoon, I pulled the SD card and watched the footage in my kitchen. There she was, Melanie Crosswell, at 6:15 in the morning, Tesla nosed onto the shoulder, headlamp lit, fingerless gloves on like she was in some spy movie, wrestling that chain through my posts and muttering, "Let's see him get in now." Clear as day. I made 3 copies, took one thumb drive straight to Sheriff Blake Turner, a no-nonsense Marine, turned lawman whose mug literally says, "Don't confuse your Google search with my badge." He watched the clip, stone-faced, said I had her dead to rights for criminal mischief and that he'd arrest her if I wanted. And for a second the idea of seeing her in cuffs right then was tempting. But I'd learned something. One incident is a splash, a pattern is a hammer. So we filed an official report, got a case number, and I went home and sent Melanie a registered letter quoting the statute for interfering with legal access and letting her know the next lock would be attached to a criminal complaint and a civil suit. That should have scared anyone rational. But rational had left the building. Suddenly county agencies started showing up like I'd hung a harass me sign on the mailbox. First a health inspector from the county, then someone from environmental quality, then zoning, each arriving with anonymous complaints about sewage runoff, water contamination from cattle, unlicensed fishing tours I supposedly ran, and each leaving with clean reports and an apology because my systems are better than code. My water tests cleaner than most campgrounds. And this is a working cattle ranch, not a tourist lake. 3 agencies in 48 hours, 3 wasted days of my time. And when I pulled the complaint copies through a records request, every anonymous sender had an address ending in @ironwoodbluffshow.org. I fed all of it into the file Lauren was building. Letters, videos, reports, my dad's fishing logs that proved our exclusive use. And for a while it felt like we were bailing a boat with a spoon. Until that afternoon in the fire station, when the 911 console lit up and dispatcher Carla Jensen read out the words that changed everything. Trespasser at Ironwood Lake, private HOA property, possibly armed. And I heard Melanie's voice on the line insisting that the lake belonged to the association. Trying to get DPU. Ty sent to remove some squatter, and watch Carla pull up the county map, see my name on that parcel, and very calmly tell the caller the land was recorded to Caleb Rourke, not any HOA. I was sitting 10 feet away, volunteer fire chief, listening to my own neighbor lie about my land on a recorded emergency channel. Sheriff Turner came over the radio saying he'd treat it as an unfounded call and flag it for false reporting, and I went home that night with something new simmering under the anger, curiosity, because nobody goes that far, spends that much, calls 911 on a lie, just for the thrill of bossing a rancher around. So I did what insomniac ranchers do when their gut says something's off. I made coffee at midnight and spread every document I had across the dining table. HOA covenants, Ironwood Bluffs Incorporation papers, old ads from High Summit Properties, county plat minutes. I read until my eyes blurred, and then I found it, tucked into Section 7, Paragraph 3 of their governing documents, in black and white. Every homeowner in Ironwood Bluffs was promised exclusive recreational access to Ironwood Lake, secured by permanent easement, sold on my water as if it belonged to them. And a quick trip through the county archives showed that the developer had once applied for that easement, been denied after I objected, and then went ahead and sold the dream anyway. In other words, High Summit Properties wrote checks with their brochures that the law never cashed, and now the Ironwood Bluffs Community Association was staring down the barrel of a potential class action from their own residents, unless they could somehow manufacture historic use of my lake, get a court to hand them what the county had already refused, and every trespass, every anonymous complaint, every locked gate and Facebook smear suddenly snapped into focus. They weren't just harassing a stubborn rancher. They were building a fake history for an adverse possession claim. The next morning over coffee at Magpie's Diner, I laid it all out for Sheriff Blake Turner. The videos, the complaints from HOA emails, the 911 recording, the covenants, the developer's old marketing about your private oasis. And he leaned back, wiped cinnamon roll icing off his mustache, and said we had two tracks: the criminal path, false reporting, trespass, potentially more, and the public one, where we drag all this into the light, so even people who don't like cows understand who's lying. After that, Lauren Keating drew up a three-pronged legal response: a harassment and defamation suit against the HOA seeking damages and fees, a complaint against their attorney for pushing frivolous claims, and a courtesy letter to High Summit Properties walking them through exactly how much liability they'd created by promising a lake they didn't own. Developers care more about reputation than grass or cows. Within hours, their lawyer called Lauren, and by day's end they'd agreed to send every Ironwood Bluffs resident a letter clarifying that Ironwood Lake had never been part of their purchase, apologizing for confusing marketing language, and confirming it remained private Rourke property, which meant Melanie's legal foundation wasn't just cracked, it was gone. Cornered people get reckless, and a few weeks later I walked into my east pasture at dawn and knew something was wrong before I saw it. A cluster of cows standing around the trough, heads low, drool stringing from one heifer's mouth, moving like they were drunk. I've seen enough sickness to recognize poisoning when it's in front of me. Dr. Mason Heller, our large animal vet, confirmed it before the coffee in his thermos cooled. Ethylene glycol, antifreeze, not enough to kill yet, but give it a couple more days and I'd be dragging carcasses. The spring that feeds that trough runs under the county road through a culvert anyone can reach from the HOA side, and that was a hole in my defenses I hadn't patched. I patched it that afternoon with another game camera and a prayer. 2 nights later, I pulled the card and watched a white Tesla roll up without headlights at 2:17 a.m., watched a figure in dark clothes and a headlamp carry a plastic jug to the culvert, crouch, pour, and turn just enough for the beam to catch her face. Melanie Crosswell, clear as if she'd posed for it. I took that footage to Sheriff Turner, who got a warrant, sent deputies to her garage, and they came back with exactly what we expected: a half-empty jug of matching antifreeze, a funnel with residue, gloves shoved into a trash bag. And suddenly we weren't just talking about nuisance calls and Facebook slander. We were talking felony livestock poisoning. When Blake asked if I wanted her picked up immediately or at the already scheduled county mediation Lauren had arranged, where we planned to lay out the pattern in front of the county attorney Dana Wells and Commissioner Henry Locke, I thought about my dad's hands on a fishing rod, my wife's trembling shoulders reading those online lies, my cattle staggering at the trough, and decided if there was ever a time to let someone hang themselves with their own rope, it was now. Wait, I said. Let her walk into that room like she still runs the show. And he just shook his head and told me I had a mean streak I must have gotten from Roy. The day before the mediation, Melanie tried one last gambit, called a TV station out of Billings, pitched them a story about a connected rancher bullying retirees out of their promised lake, and Channel 12 investigates, with a young reporter named Evan Price hungry for a villain, showed up at Ironwood Bluffs with a camera crew. I didn't find out until one of the more decent homeowners called to warn me, voice tight with embarrassment. And when Evan phoned and asked for my side on camera, I told him I wasn't interested in performing, but I'd give him every scrap of documentation I had. We met in town, and I slid a thick folder across the table, videos of trespassers, gate locking, That 911 recording with Melanie lying to dispatch. The complaint timeline from HOA emails. Dr. Heller's report. The search warrant inventory from her garage. The covenants promising a lake the developer never owned. And Evan sat there going paler with every page, realizing the bully rancher story had been fed to him by the actual bully. 2 nights later the segment aired, opening with a sweeping shot of glass houses and mountains, then pivoting hard into a narrative about an HOA president accused of harassment, false emergencies, and poisoning cattle, with Sheriff Blake Turner on camera confirming an active felony case. Public opinion flipped in about 20 minutes. Comments poured onto the station's page from people across the state telling their own HOA horror stories, locals defending me by name, and even Ironwood Bluff's residents apologizing, saying they'd been misled. That night Melanie emailed me personally, offering to resign as president and move on if I'd drop everything, saying she'd made mistakes but didn't deserve prison. I stared at those lines and thought about antifreeze in my trough, about deputies bagging evidence in her garage, and closed the laptop without a reply. Sometimes mercy is just letting the law do its job. The next morning the conference room at the county building smelled like old carpet, stale coffee, and nerves. On one side of the long table sat me and Lauren Keating, in clean jeans and a pressed shirt that felt strange on my shoulders. On the other sat Melanie Crosswell and her city lawyer, who kept fiddling with his tie like it was strangling him. Along the wall stood Sheriff Blake Turner in full uniform and County Attorney Dana Wells with a yellow pad. 3 remaining board members from Ironwood Bluffs Community Association lined up in folding chairs, and a court reporter in the corner, waiting to capture whatever happened next. Commissioner Henry Locke, a retired judge with the kind of tired eyes that have seen too many small town dramas, opened by calling it informal mediation, asked me to explain why I'd requested it. And that was my cue. I told him, respectfully, that I wasn't there to haggle over trails or access. I was there to put a full record of harassment and criminal conduct on display so nobody could pretend they didn't know what was happening on that hill anymore. Then I hooked my laptop into the projector and hit play. We watched Melanie and her entourage marching onto my land with that first rogue survey crew, listened to her refuse to leave when told she was trespassing, saw her at dawn locking my gate and muttering about keeping me out of my own pasture, heard her voice over the 911 audio lying about common HOA property and a hostile squatter when she knew, and had been told by dispatch, that the parcel belonged to me. Watched the timeline of complaint emails scroll by with at Ironwood Bluff Show. Org at the end of each address, and saw in black and white the HOA minutes where she'd pushed a plan to establish historic use of the lake and budgeted $50,000 for a legal fight to seize access the developer had falsely sold. Then came the culvert video, the Tesla easing onto the shoulder at 2:17 a.m., the figure in a headlamp pouring a jug into my water source, turning just enough to make Melanie's face undeniable, followed by Dr. Mason Heller's report, the antifreeze brand, the search warrant list from her garage, the half-used jug, the funnel, the gloves. When I finally shut the projector off, the room was so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights hum. Dana Wells asked if I wanted to press charges, and I said yes, on the poisoning and the false report, then looked over at the shaken board members and added that whether I pushed on trespass and harassment depended on whether the association owned what they'd done or tried to hide behind one person. Lauren stood, laid out our civil suit, $75,000 in damages, full attorney fees, and a public apology, and offered them a single way out: strip Melanie of her title, pay my legal costs, and we'd dismiss the civil case. But the criminal counts would move forward because some lines don't get erased with a check. Sheriff Turner stepped away from the wall, read Melanie her rights, cuffed her hands while her lawyer sputtered, and she broke down in tears. And when the door closed behind them, the 3 board members slipped into the hallway, argued in harsh whispers, and came back pale but decisive, agreeing to everything. Her immediate removal, payment of my fees, a signed letter published in the county paper admitting the harassment and clarifying that Ironwood Lake had always been private Rourke land. They looked at me like men stepping off a sinking boat onto solid ground for the first time in months. 3 months later, Melanie Crosswell pled out in district court, took a reduced charge and 2 years probation on the poisoning plus a heavy restitution bill, lost her real estate license, sold her house in Ironwood Bluffs at a steep loss, and left Redwater County behind. The HOA cut a check for my legal costs and sent that public apology just like they'd promised, and instead of pocketing the $25,000 she was ordered to pay me, I put it into the Roy Rourke Land Stewardship Scholarship, a yearly award for local kids studying agriculture or land management, the kind of work that actually keeps places like this alive. I didn't stop there. I donated a steep, rocky 40-acre corner of Rourke Ranch to the County Conservancy as a permanent wild easement, put up a small sign that says Rourke Family Conservation Area, so anyone hiking up there knows some pieces of ground aren't for carving or flipping. They're just for existing. Twice a year, I host a community fishing day at Ironwood Lake. $20 a head that goes straight to the fire department. Kids from town, and even from Ironwood Bluffs learning to cast. Where my grandfather dug ditches, my father keeps his fishing logs on the cabin table, and most mornings he still shuffles down to the dock. Line in the water, land still ours. So that's how an HOA president tried to call 911 to have me removed from my own lake. Not realizing the call would come straight into the office where I sit as volunteer fire chief. That's how months of paper cuts turned into criminal charges, public apologies, scholarships, and a community that knows exactly where the property line and the moral line are drawn. The story has an ending I can live with. The land is still in my family's hands. The cattle are healthy. My wife can walk into town without hearing lies about her husband. And the people who bought those big houses now know the truth about what they were sold. But I keep thinking about this, and I'll throw it to you. When someone with a title, a board, or a little bit of power starts using the system like a weapon to rewrite reality, how far should you be allowed to go to defend what's yours? Is it enough to let the law grind them down? Or is there a point where holding back becomes its own kind of injustice? And when the dust settles, do we owe them any grace at all? Or is the cleanest justice the kind where they lose everything they try to take from you, and you use that win to build something better for people who never lifted a hand against you?